One of my favorite things in life is traveling. I love the excitement of packing and planning. And I actually enjoy the process of getting to the destination as much as I enjoy the destination itself, especially if it includes an airport. Airports are like an aquarium for humans. You can see all kinds of people who normally wouldn't exist in the same habitat. Some are happy, some are nervous, and some are just weird. The whole traveling thing is a lot of fun for me, with one exception. I am terrified of flying. I just don't love the idea of crashing and plummeting to my death. And I always get thrown off by the size of planes. Does it not make you just a little nervous that something bigger than your house is supposed to just float in the air? When I look around the airport, everyone else seems completely calm, which makes me believe that I am the only person playing out every scenario that could take our plane down. Even if you don't share my fear of flying, you've probably felt that feeling before, the nagging question of, am I the only one who doesn't get it? The same is true in so many areas of our lives. Nobody feels comfortable feeling like they're the only one with questions. In fact, we all hesitate to speak up about our doubts because we wonder if we're the only one who has them. For a lot of us, no place makes us feel more uncomfortable about talking about doubts than church. For you, hopefully, church is a place where you find community and learn new truths. But in the back of your mind, you may have some big questions when it comes to faith and God. You may have some things that bug you, things that you're not sure about. But you don't talk about them, do you? Why? Because nobody talks about their doubts at church. But if you think about it, this is crazy because we talk about a lot of other challenging things, like a God we can't see, a flood that covered the earth, parting seas, blind people becoming not blind, and sick people becoming not sick. And the whole thing centers around one man who died and came back to life. I think we all have seasons where we harbor some doubts about our faith. We just don't talk about them. So, if it's normal to doubt, where do we get the idea that we need to be quiet about our questions and doubts in church? Maybe when you were younger, someone told you to quit asking questions and just believe. So that's what you did. Maybe you tried to ask a question or voice a doubt, but you were shut down and you've never really felt comfortable doing it again. Or maybe you're afraid to ask because you're afraid God won't like it. So we keep quiet. Or maybe we stay quiet because of how much we value our faith. Showing up at church and being around friends as we learn and talk and sing and pray. These things are important to us. And maybe we're afraid that if we talk about our doubts, we might lose our faith. Our questions might cause us not to believe at all, and we worry that that could be an outcome. Maybe we even believe that this is how it's supposed to be. We think that being a good Christian is turning off the part of our brains that ask questions and rolling with whatever a pastor or small group leader says. But if you're like me, you've probably discovered that not dealing with your doubts doesn't make them go away. Sure, they may be quiet for a moment. They might not bug you for a day or two, but eventually they always come back, and sometimes louder. So, the question is this: what do you do about your doubts? If they don't go away, is our best option really just to keep them quiet? To ignore them in hopes that we don't feel them anymore? Or is it possible there's a better way? A way to take on our doubts and questions that can actually help our faith grow. As we wrap up this series today, we're going to focus on this idea. Part of building a faith that's mine is figuring out what to do with our doubts. If you have doubts, you're in good company. In fact, even the people who saw Jesus face to face and witnessed his miracles still found themselves uncertain about him. One of the most dramatic places we see this is in an account written by Mark. According to Mark's account, Jesus had been away with 3 of his other disciples. When Jesus returned, he saw that his followers and a few other religious leaders were arguing. Jesus asked them why. Take a look. "What are you arguing with them about?" he, being Jesus, asked. A man in the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought you my son, who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." It sounds like something out of a scary movie. A man showed up, and his son was somehow being attacked and possessed by an evil spirit. It would be terrifying to see something like this, especially happening to your own kid. The dad just wanted his son to feel better, so he took him to see Jesus. Here's what happened next. So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." This guy was standing in front of Jesus, who had already calmed a storm, healed incurable diseases, and raised a dead little girl back to life simply by saying a word. And now the dad said, "Jesus, if you can?" Are you kidding me? If he can? Maybe in the emotion of the moment, the dad forgot who he was talking to. Most people wouldn't bring it up. They'd act like their doubt didn't bother them. They'd fake it. But not this dad. Maybe he asked the question on purpose. Maybe he saw Jesus and realized that he couldn't hide his feelings. Maybe he knew he had to express his doubt. So he was honest. And what did Jesus do? Strike him with lightning? Walk away? Correct him? Tell him to be quiet? Refuse to help? No. Take a look at what Jesus said. "If you can," said Jesus, "everything is possible for one who believes." Jesus repeated what the man said. Now, I don't think he did it to make the dad feel bad. I think he did it to meet the dad where he was. Jesus met him in the middle of his uncertainty, his doubt, and his questioning. If it were me, I would have backpedaled and said, "Jesus, that's not what I meant." Not this guy. Instead, he owned it. Immediately, the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." It's a weird thing to say, isn't it? I do believe, but help my unbelief? In other words, I do believe, but I don't. I want to believe this, but I still have questions. I want to have faith, but I still have doubts. I need this to be true, but I'm not sure. If we're honest, a lot of us can feel this guy's frustration. We're stuck somewhere between belief and disbelief. We feel like they're opposites. If we have one, we can't have the other. But here stood this guy, talking to Jesus and admitting that he both believed and didn't. He knew what he should say, but instead he said what was real. And Jesus was okay with it. Jesus didn't walk away disappointed. No, he answered his question right there. He healed his son. The Bible doesn't tell us what happened to the man after that, but I imagine his faith was never the same. Our faith works a lot like that too. Having doubts doesn't mean you'll lose your faith, and neither does talking about them. In fact, the opposite is true. Dealing with doubt is part of growing your faith. It's true, talking about your doubts can do more to grow your faith than weaken it. It can make your faith more solid, durable, mature. It can help it become one that you call mine. Maybe that's why when asked what commandment was the greatest, Jesus said, Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. One of the things I love about Jesus is that he didn't tell us to turn off our brains or stop asking questions. Instead, he encouraged us to use our minds to know God better. Maybe for you, that means you stop ignoring your doubts. The first step for some of you is to stop silencing your doubts and questions. Talk about them. Tell God about them. He's big enough to handle it. In fact, start tonight by writing down 2 doubts or questions that you have. Owning up to those may actually help you relate to God. Be honest with one other person about your doubts. You don't have to stand up in church and yell questions at the pastor. But you should be honest with a friend, a spouse, a mentor, or members of your small group. Find someone who is further along in their faith than you, who can help you search for answers. Share your doubts with someone who can walk with you towards finding more belief in them. Let's go back to my fear about flying. A few years ago, I happened to be seated on a flight next to a pilot for that airline. I didn't want to tell him my doubts about flying. Seriously, who tells a pilot that they're afraid of crashing? But I decided to tell him. He was super nice. He talked for 2 hours about the physics of flight and the training of commercial pilots. I didn't understand it all, but I certainly understood a lot more than I ever had before. And because of it, some of my fears were calmed. If I hadn't been honest with my doubts, that conversation never would have happened. In the same way, we can be honest about our doubts regarding faith. And God is way more patient and understanding than that pilot. Your faith isn't going to fall apart if you ask questions. You're not going to be kicked out of your small group or told you're a bad Christian. In fact, dealing with doubt is part of growing your faith. So, talk about it. Ask questions. Face your doubts head on as a way of owning your faith. Today, I want you to think about your doubts. You may not have any right now. That's okay. Or you may doubt everything. That's okay too. I want you to know that this is a safe place to talk about whatever you're wrestling with. But here's the reality. You may not get all the answers today, tomorrow, or even in this lifetime. Your small group leader doesn't know everything about God. Neither do I, your friends, or your pastor. Nobody does. The point is, so many people lose their faith or leave their faith along the way, not because they asked questions and discovered some truth that made them walk away, but because they never dealt with their doubts. Our goal for you, now and years from now, is that you have a growing, healthy, strong, and honest relationship with God. And just like reading the Bible, serving, attending church, and being in a small group, dealing with your doubt is part of growing a faith that you can call mine.